What's up, YouTube? Supernova back again for another video. This video is to talk about my forged pistons. They finally come in. Ordered them from TH Motorsports. They're of course a Wiseco high performance forged piston kit. This kit cost me $723. I want to say the shipping was free. Of course, this kit comes with the necessary instructions, comes with the wrist pin keepers, and also comes with all the necessary rings and piston pins. I just want to talk about, how different these pistons are compared to my stock pistons and the instructions and stuff. These instructions, none of this paper you don't need to throw away for sure, because these papers are very important. As far as your service manual, most manuals, they tell you your oil ring gap. Alright, this dot represents the front of the motor. That's the way the piston needs to go. Your oil ring gap will go here and here, and your piston compression ring gap will go here. Top, second, or second and top, vice versa. Also, another reason why there's a dot on these pistons represents the front of the motor is because these wrist pins have an offset. I measured it on this piston in particular, and this is a 96 millimeter versus the stock, which is a 95.5 millimeter. And go dog, go. And basically from the outside of the wrist pin to here, let's see, if you look at it by the eye, you can pretty much tell. But from one side of the wrist pin, I think it's, let's see, okay, wrist pin is offset this way, I believe. Yes. Sorry. Wrist pin is offset from here this way by 1 millimeter. I measured it with a caliper, and with the wrist pin installed, this is the stock wrist pin. This is the one that needs to go with the piston. From here to here is 59.5 millimeters, and then from this side to this side is 58.5 millimeters. So the wrist pin is offset by 1 millimeter. But that's that's Nissan's design, as far as that goes. Also, if you notice, the stock and the forged pistons, they both have floating wrist pins. This one feels a lot more tighter than this one. This one, of course, feels quite loose. And the reason for that is because when stuff heats up, everything expands. And when it expands, it's supposed to tighten up. So it's good for the wrist pin to be just a tad bit loose in this piston versus this one. So after everything heats up, it still acts as a floating wrist pin. Also, something else in comparison in between the two pistons is the skirts on the stock is longer. Also, your piston ring gaps have been moved down further. Looks like the wrist pin area has been moved up a little bit. Also, these are dish pistons, negative 10 cc's. This is like the stock piston is like a 9.2 or 9.3 to 1 compression ratio. This is an 8.8 to 1 compression ratio. Also, this piston only has two holes for the oil rings. This piston here has 4 holes for the oil rings. Also, the width of the piston ring, the width of the skirts are also a little bit more narrow, as well as the skirts on the pistons themselves are a little bit more narrow. And you can't, I mean, if you look real close with the naked eye, you can tell that the wrist pin is offset. It's really hard to tell on a stock piston, but it does have an offset. This one I cleaned up a little bit, of course. Also, you can see there's been weight shaved off of this piston because everything's more square inside of here, and on the outside is where a lot of this stuff, it's more rounded out. Also, if you look at the texture of each piston, you probably won't see it on the camera, but this piston's a lot more smooth on the casting areas than this one. This one's a little bit more rough. So it's just a basic cast piston. Also, just by the feel of hand, these pistons are a little bit lighter. These pistons have 360 written on them. That's the gram weight. These pistons weigh 360 grams a piece. Also, the valve gaps, the valve clearance on the pistons are a little bit bigger and deeper. Of course, they look smaller on this piston because it's a dish piston versus a dome piston like this one. And yes, I call this a dome piston because, I don't know if you can see, this area is not flush with the piston. It actually rises up. Again, if you follow my channel, in my previous videos I mentioned that I had 3 spark plugs melt down on me on 150 shot of nitrous at 140 plus miles an hour, and it didn't melt down the pistons. However, it did burn one exhaust valve, and it did melt 3 spark plugs. But the pistons were not hurt, except one of them had a little bit of debris from the spark plug, got down between the piston and the cylinder wall, and scored the piston really bad. I also mentioned that the ring gaps have been moved further down, but those are the difference as far as, you know, between the stock and a forged piston. Again, I got these from TH Motorsports. It comes with everything you need for a piston kit. Rings, because Wiseco is very picky on what rings you use on certain pistons. So it comes with the necessary rings, and it comes with the necessary piston pins and the locks as well. So with that being said, now I'm going to start moving on to technical stuff. This is the paper. It mentions about wrist pin offset. Of course, the offset on these pins, on these pistons, the offset, like if it's moved that way, alright, the rotation is clockwise on a 350Z motor. The rotation is clockwise if you're facing the car. The wrist pin is moved over, so whichever way that's over needs to go the opposite direction of the rotation of the crankshaft. So, and of course that's what this dot is for. Tells you which way is the front of the motor. So if I'm on the driver's side, it would go over here. If I'm on the passenger side, it would go in like that, if that's the front of the motor. So with that being said, Alright, it comes with a piece of paper. Talks about wrist pin offset. If a piston does not have a dot showing, which way is the front or which way it should be facing, be sure to get a caliper and measure. Take a wrist pin, stock or the wrist pin it come with, it doesn't matter, and measure with a digital caliper from here to here, and then from here to here. You'll see the difference. So of course this is, let's see, yeah, this space is smaller than this space. So, and of course with a stock piston, if it didn't have a wrist pin offset, you would know you would measure it with a digital caliper. If it didn't have an offset, these two would be the exact same. Okay, but this does have an offset by 1 millimeter. Very important to notate. And I'll even tell you in your service manual that the dot always goes towards the motor, the front of the motor. So that's what this paper is for. It also comes with a paper talking about the dimensions of the pistons. Something important to keep. And it also tells you the instructions and installation of the pistons and all that stuff. Alright, these are the rings. I'll get to that in a minute. Let's see, hold on 1 minute. Do this piece of paper. Now, in your service manual, if anybody watching this video has installed or rebuilt an engine before, it will tell you how to set your ring gaps. And a lot of times they're 180 degrees from each other. When installing forged pistons, most of them will come with specific instructions on a specific way of installing ring gaps. It's not just a simple throw together process. Installing these pistons are going to be very time consuming. I chose Wiseco because they're known for holding together in 2-stroke engines and high performance engines. They don't just come apart. And of course, 2-strokes, they have very high RPM. Most of them do. Let's see if I can find this page. Here it is. Okay. It'll tell you the oil rail gap. Alright, this is the front of the piston, which is the dot. Your oil ring gap, the bottom one, and spacer expander gap. Okay. Your oil ring gap is going to go here, and your top oil ring gap is going to go here. Or excuse me, I read that wrong. Oil ring gap, okay. You got your upper, which is going to go here, and your lower, which is going to go here. And then your number 1 ring gap would go here. And then, number 1 ring gap, compression ring, will go here, and number 2 will go here, which are all 180 degrees from each other. You got your 2 compression rings, okay, 180 degrees, and your 2 oil gap rings, which are 180 degrees. On a Wiseco piston, it's different. You have to put the top oil rail gap here, which is where your compression ring gap would go, and then 90 degrees from that, instead of 180, 90 degrees from that would be your bottom oil ring gap versus being over here. Alright, and over here would be your upper O-ring gap. So the top one will go here, the bottom one will go here, your top compression ring would go here, your second compression ring would go here. That's where your oil gap would go. And then the expander gap, which is a little squiggly ring, that gap would go here. Alright, that's what the paper says. Also, it tells you that any rings that are marked or beveled, for the second ring, the mark would go up top, the bevel would be up top. The top ring, the mark would go up top, or the bevel would go down. These rings are marked except for the compression ring. No, excuse me. Let's see. Yeah, it's the second ring. The second ring has a bevel, and being that it's, let's see, it's marked. Okay, it's got a mark up top, and the bevel is going to go on the bottom, and it's got an outside bevel at that. So, hold on 1 minute. Gotta put the camera down. Put that back up. Alright, now. My second ring has an outside bevel, but it says with the marking near the end gap, which both of my rings do. They're in 50 on these specific ones. I'm going to step aside and make a note. These are 96 millimeter pistons, only half a millimeter bigger than the stock pistons. They will be, alright, the stock piston is 95.5 millimeters big, and the new pistons, I ordered them to be 96 millimeters. You can get them in stock size, but I went on ahead and got the 96 millimeters. Also, this is where it gets technical. Piston ring gap. Most engines you can just throw together on stock rings, but these rings, you have to meet a certain end gap. Now, if you're not willing to take the time to do this is very time consuming. I would say it's probably going to take about an hour per piston to do. And I got 6 pistons I got to put in. But first I got to get these Darton sleeves installed. If you're not going to take the time to do this, you need to stop the video now, put the wrench down, don't go no further. If you are willing to take the time to do this, then continue watching the video. I'm going to show y'all basically how this works. Now, this is based off of 96 millimeter bore. Convert that to inches is 3.7795 inch bore. And it will tell you in these instructions that if your measurements of your bore is in millimeters, you'll need to convert it into inches, and it'll tell you how to do that. Take your millimeters and divide it by 25.4, and it will give you your bore in inches. In the service manual, it mentions the stock bore at 95.5 millimeters, and it also has it set to the side the mention of the bore size in inches as well, but it does not have the size of bore in the 96 millimeters. See, 3.76 inches, and then it says 95.5 millimeters. But I went 96, so I divided by 25.4, and I got 3.77. Now, with that being said, you got different categories that you can choose from on what you're going with, and it'll tell you what ring gap you're going to need for each ring. The oil ring gaps, they only have to be a minimum of 10 millimeters. I mean, excuse me, 1/10 of an inch, and that's the space. It'll tell you 0.012. Yeah, 1/10 of an inch. I believe I'm reading that right. So with that being said, make sure I had a piece of paper. It's like a cheat sheet. Anyway, so basically your top compression ring and your second compression ring are the ones that need to be gapped.